Hey everybody, I'm going to show you a single exchange in a rapier and dagger bout, and I want you to think about one thing as you watch. When do I, on the left in green, choose to attack? Did you see it? Let's watch it one more time. It happens right here. Now let's break down what's going on. Fencing is about making timely choices, and all of our source texts attempt to describe situations like this using theoretical language. So if you're allergic to jargon, or if you don't like to hear German words or Italian words or whatever, probably best to stop watching now. So at the start, both of us are in the Zufechten, right? The approach. We're too far away to hit each other without having to take a step forward and close range first. So this is the approach. This is the phase of the fight where we can try to intimidate our opponent, use body language to tell them what we're doing right. We have to plan and structure an attack if we want to attack in a way that keeps us safe and dominates our opponent, which is what the texts are about. So we're in the Zufechten, and things get a little bit more complicated when we're talking about rapier and dagger versus rapier alone, or dusak or longsword, because the rapier and dagger has the dagger that aids in defense, right? So this makes certain postures that with a sword alone would be pretty weak or unthreatening into positions that are actually quite strong and difficult to attack, and can be very, very, very threatening. And you can see here on the left, my posture is like that, right? I'm retaining strength, and as you watch the approach here, right? As you watch my opponent get closer, you can see that I'm tracking his movement with my hips and my body language, but I'm not actually moving my feet, right? So I'm keeping my upper body quite stable and strong and pointed at my opponent, but I'm not actually moving my feet. I've decided to stay here and defend this ground. So when my opponent chooses to close the distance between us, he's trying to take an advantage from me, right? He's not just going to walk into my range and allow himself to get hit. What he's trying to do is take away some of the advantage that I actually currently hold in the posture that I have with the threat that I'm essentially that I'm sending him, right? What I'm telling him with my body language is I am going to thrust you from here and hit you. And this has happened in this bout before. We're actually going to see a little bit later when a similar exchange like this happens and my opponent actually defends himself from it. But in this case, obviously, he doesn't, right? So he comes forward and he wants an advantage. In German theory of fencing, there are only two advantages, and the advantages are strength and threat. This comes straight out of the 5 words, right? The 5 words are strong, weak, for and nach, indes. Strong is better than weak, but weakness can defeat strength in certain cases. And threat, being in the 4, is about compelling a response from your opponent, right? It's about threatening them with such potency that they have to either defend themselves or they have to move, right? That's what 4 is. 4 is actually defined by your opponent respecting your threat and acting against it, right? So you can't actually be in the 4 if your opponent isn't paying attention to you, because you have no actually advantage from all the threat that you're offering because they're ignoring it, right? So Thane has to make a choice here. My opponent has to make a choice here. As he's coming closer, he has to decide which advantage does he want to focus on taking first, and how is he going to do that? And we can see as he steps closer, right, he decides what he wants to do is take away my advantage of strength. And he's doing that by stepping forward and extending his sword to cover the weak of my sword and take away the direct line thrust that I have to his body, right? So this is a totally doctrinal approach. This is definitely something that Meyer advocates that you do pretty frequently. Now, he never actually says, come and take a strong position. He doesn't have a position like Fabris does, that Fabris defines as a find, right? You have found the line on which they are going to attack you and you've covered it, right? That's what Fabris means with a find. Meyer describes this in somewhat more complicated language, but essentially all of his advice about how to deal with somebody else's sword boils down to cover it with the stronger part of yours, preferably from above, right? That's Überlaufen. Überlaufen is just the advantage of having your sword above your opponent's sword, right? So as Thane is coming toward me, he knows that I might just send a thrust his way, so he's covering the simplest line that I have to hit him in the body, right? So as we watch another couple of frames go by, right, he covers my sword. Now, this is the moment where you can see that I am responding to him. So currently, he is actually compelling my response. He's more threatening than I am, but he's not actually threatening my body. You can see the line of his sword is actually going out toward my right shoulder. And he's doing that because that is the line on which I will travel to hit his body, right? He's, again, cutting off my sword from a direct, convenient path to his body, but by doing so, he has to turn his body to my outside, right? The threat that he's compelling me to act with is not a threat of imminent harm to my body. It's a threat of taking a position that I don't want him to have. Because I don't want him to have a position where his sword is stronger than mine, in between my sword and my body, and above my sword, right? Because those are three things that take a lot of work to deal with, and I don't want to deal with those. I don't want to deal with those at all. It's much harder for me to fence if my sword is below my opponent's, overbound on their long edge, and forced away from their body. It's bad. It sucks. I don't want to be there. So I respond, and I respond by moving my point below my opponent's point and getting over onto the other side of the sword, right? You can see a couple of different things happening here, but I just want to point out that quick little Durchwechsel, that's what Meyer calls what the Italians would call a cavazione. It's a change through in English, right? All I've done is changed my point from one side of my opponent's sword to the other. And the reason I'm able to do this is because the line my opponent decided to take was too far outside my body, and it didn't actually meaningfully control my sword. We'll talk a little bit about how you might deal with this in the future, how you might actually want to approach in a more advantageous way. But I used just the couple of inches that my opponent gave me, moved my point to the other side of his sword, and before my point was even realigned, I'm already moving to attack. You can see my feet swiveling, you can see my hips moving, you can see my body language completely change, and I'm launching my attack in total security because my strong is on a weak part of my opponent's sword. He's extended in mid-step, right? He can't change his action right now. It's way too slow. So by the time I realize that my point got to the other side of his sword, I know that I have a safe, direct line, and in a way that is much more threatening than my opponent and controls his sword, right? So in a few frames, I get the point in there, right? I'm not under any threat at any point. That's just the sort of flat of his sword hitting me as he's trying to make a hasty parry. And that's it, right? That's the attack. So the moment I choose to attack is the moment that I see my opponent stepping forward, but not committing to a threat to my body. He's only committing a threat of position, trying to take away a position from me. So as he's stepping forward, I see that I might have a little bit of room. He's trying to cover my sword. I can go to the other side of his sword, and I decide more or less at this moment to attack. You can see my body changing. You can see my feet shifting and swiveling. And this is the moment here that I decide to attack because, again, I know that I've caught Thane in a moment of his movement where he can't do anything other than continue the action that he's taking. My Durchwechsel is very quick. It's a very small, tight movement, and my body is already aligned to make that really compelling thrust, right? This moment right here is what does it. So we've talked about this a little bit in German theory, right? So what Thane is trying to do as he advances is use his height position and the position of his sword to dominate a line on which I cannot travel to hit his body. I have to go around, right? Going around is a weak action, and weak actions can be punished by strength, but strength can be punished by making weak actions, right? This is the push and pull of the contraries that are the 5 words, right? Threat has to be recognized by your opponent to be useful. So for a knock is actually about how your opponent is reading you and how they are responding to you. And if they are not responding to you, again, for a knock isn't useful to you because there is no sense that you can compel a person not paying attention to you to act in a way that you want them to because they have to feel threatened, right? So the advantage of attacking, the advantage of being the compelling person, right, the threatening person, is all dependent on whether or not your opponent reads your threat and responds to it, right? So we can get into these positions where, again, just the extension of a sword is threatening enough to me that I am compelled to move. So I'm actually giving Thane the 4 before I launch my own attack, because I know that if I launch my attack without moving first, it's just going to fail, right? So that's the German theory. It's all very vague, right? We didn't even talk about like specific thrust names or cut names because we don't have to. We don't have to. All that's happening is Thane is trying to take a very simple advantage, strength, and I'm trying to circumvent that advantage by weak movement, by indirect movement, in order to get my point in a place that is more advantageous to me, and I launch my attack the moment that I do, right? So this sort of brings up our last word of the 5 words, right? Indes. Indes is just the union of the perception of an advantage and the action to take it, right? So when we watch this exchange frame by frame, right, we can see that the entire time my body is tracking my opponent's movement. I'm paying attention. When I see the sword come out, I know what it portends. I know that this is threatening to take a position I don't want Thane to have. And so the moment that I recognize that I will be dominated by his sword, which is right here, you can already see I'm moving to the other side. And as soon as I get to the other side, I start my attack. That's Indes. It is the union of the perception with the action to take advantage in the same moment that is Indes, right? It's action to advantage that is done at the appropriate time. It's done in the window of opportunity that is afforded by my opponent's actions, right? So that's German theory. And I wanted to use this exchange to talk a little bit about German theory because I think it's very clear. And we can talk a little bit about ways to defeat this particular little trick in just a second. But breaking down the theory of this stuff, like this happens in every single fencing exchange all the time. We can parse this out based on what is your opponent trying to do? What are you trying to do and respond? When do you recognize that you might need to take a position or leave a position or make your attack or make a defense or withdraw or whatever? All of these choices can be broken down by theory. And that's what the books offer. That's what the texts offer, is a way that we can discuss this stuff that makes us think about fencing in a more complex way. And it makes us make more complicated decisions faster when it matters physically in the real world. But that's just the German theory. We can also talk about this a little bit in Italian theory, and I've already covered this a little bit by talking about Fabris and the find. But this moment here, right? This is a moment where Thane, again, has advanced. He's covered my sword. This is what Fabris calls a find. He has compelled me to do a change through, a cavazione, which is what they call it in Italian, bringing my point from around on his inside to his outside. And then I've launched my own attack from, Fabris's seconda or whatever you might want to call it. This is like a tierce held at my hip. It doesn't really matter. Italian theory uses a term that simplifies in some ways the discussion of these moments, right? And in Italian theory, they call this tempo. And Fabris gives us the clearest definition of tempo of any of the Italian writers. All 3 of them write about it slightly differently. They're all more or less coherent. They're all kind of the same thing, but they've discussed a little bit differently. And I think that's worth pointing out. But Fabris defines a tempo as when 2 fencers are in range to hit each other, and one fencer takes an action. Any action that is taken when you are in range to hit is a tempo. And Fabris further defines a tempo as an opportunity to hit or take advantage from your opponent, right? So if you are in range to be struck and you move at all in a way that isn't directly controlling your opponent's sword, that's a tempo. And a good fencer will recognize the tempo and act within the tempo to take the tempo, right? So the tempo here is essentially measured by Thane's movement to try to control my sword, right? So it starts at about right when his back foot settles, right? That's when he steps forward with his front foot, and that's when he extends his sword to cover mine. So he comes here. So the tempo is essentially measured by the fact that I know that Thane is going to try to cover my sword. He's doing it by stepping forward, right? And as long as I act and start my attack literally right here, if I had waited any longer, the tempo's gone, right? I don't actually have any advantage anymore. I have to go right now for this to hit, right? And I do, because I recognize the tempo and I start moving forward, right? So being able to kind of recognize this kind of thing is actually a terribly useful thing to get used to in fencing, because you'll see these opportunities, you'll see these tempos happening all over the place all the time. And one of the ways that another Italian writer talks about, Nicoletto Giganti, he gives like a list of various things that are tempos, right? So your opponent does this, that's a tempo. They change posture when they're in range to hit, that's a tempo. They take a step when they're in range to be struck, that's a tempo. They're literally doing almost anything but directly controlling your sword, that's a tempo. So if Thane was properly a student of Italian theory, he would know that his attempt to cover my sword, his find or gain of my sword, right, is going to compel exactly what I just did, a cavazione, a change of line. So if he knows that, and if he's able to act quickly enough, he's going to know that what I want to do is go to the other side of his sword, which is really easy because he's only covering my tip, go to the other side of his sword, and then start my attack. So if he had known this was my intention, what he could do right now is pivot his hips to his right, to my outside, carry on his strong over my weak, and cover that line. He would have a tempo that I gave him to hit me in response, right? And he doesn't do that because, again, I've caught him in tempo. I've caught him in the midst of his action, and I'm acting within it, right? So if we're going to talk about both of these different theories, we've got tempo and indes, they're not the same, right? Tempo is what the Germans would call, or what Meyer would call at least, the opportunity to hit, the opportunity to take advantage, which is exactly how Fabris defines it. But then the tempo itself is constrained by the moment of time that action takes. So the tempo is the opportunity, as discussed by the Germans. Taking the tempo doesn't have a specific term in Italian terminology, but it does in German terminology, and that's indes. That's action indes. That's advantageous action when the conditions are appropriate for that action to take advantage. That's indes, right? So we talked a little bit about how to deal with this. If you are in this position, right? If you've advanced on your opponent, you covered their line, they've changed it, and they're launching an attack immediately, how do you deal with it? Luckily, in this same bout, this situation has happened almost exactly the same way earlier, and Thane reacted a little bit differently, and let's watch that one now. All right, so this is earlier in the bout. This is one of the first exchanges, as a matter of fact. You can see almost everything is exactly the same. I'm in the same sort of position. My dagger arm is forward. My right arm, my sword arm, is held back toward my hips. You can even see my feet are turned slightly to Thane's inside, or to his outside, over his right shoulder. And this is because my movement when I lunge tends to be oblique, right? I tend to kind of go toward one of the sides rather than directly forward for various reasons. But you can see that my torso is pivoting to cover, right? And as Thane comes forward to cover the line of my sword, I do the exact same thing. I go to the other side, but this time, what happens is Thane reads the movement and goes to cover it. And he totally stuffs me, right? Just like that. That's it. That's all he did. He just kept strong against my weak movement, and he ruined my attempt to attack. That's it. And most of the time, when you defend from these opportunities, they don't look like anything really fencing-wise has happened. But a lot of the time, things have happened. Fencing has happened, right? You've done the fencing. You have ruined somebody's chance to attack you. That's almost as good as making a timely parry, except it's not as good because making a timely parry will usually give you an opportunity to hit. But, right? That's it. So if you are in this position, right? If you are fencing somebody who likes to go to the other side, what you can try to do is take a strong position above their sword, right? Remember Überlaufen, try to engage with your long edge from above. Try to force them to change line, but recognize that what you're doing is taking away the straightest line to your body and forcing them to go around if they want to attack your body. So as you force them to go around, track the movement of the weak of their sword, cover it with your strong. And if they attack then, they'll just bury themselves into your crossguard, and then you can do whatever you want to them, right? But this whole thing is mostly just to kind of go into detail about one single exchange and talk about it with a lot of depth in terms of how it reflects the theory of fencing, because that is something that I find is lacking, is this textually derived version of talking about advantages and choices in fencing that I think is somewhat lacking in modern HEMA. If you like stuff like this, let me know. I'll do more of these. There's a lot of stuff that I can do even just of my own fencing. If you have moments of your own fencing that you'd like me to break down like this, send it to me, chat with me. We'll see if we can do something. All right. Otherwise, thank you very much. If you have questions, put them in the comments. Be happy to answer them. And thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.